So, David, there's no shortage of weird stuff going on. I'll just mention the Pete Hegseth thing because he's next up in this pipeline of nominees that Trump has offered. And I mention him in the legal context, in the context of your analysis, because it's his the legal stickiness associated with a sexual assault allegation. And it was more than just an allegation and payoff. I mean, there was that. But this is a woman who, as a sexual assault victim, actually went to law enforcement authorities. They didn't bring charges ultimately, but she does have contemporaneous, they did do a rape kit and all of that sort of thing, and she does have contemporaneous communications about this with friends, et cetera. Can you speak to just the legal threshold that had to be met for them to bring charges? And maybe, to me, that's always interesting in these situations when there's an investigation, they don't bring charges, and how that changes the arithmetic overall on the event itself.
Well, these cases are very controversial, of course. In terms of a criminal charge, there'd have to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Generally speaking, if it's one person's word against the other, even if you believe one of them a little bit more, let's say it's usually a man and a woman. I know I'm being traditional, but that's normally the situation statistically that we see. So if they believe the woman a little bit more than the man, they still should not bring the charges because that's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So they always look around for corroboration. If there has been sexual contact that you can prove by DNA or sperm or something like that, then of course that's very strong evidence to corroborate that a sexual encounter took place. But then there's almost always the defense that it was consensual in these kinds of cases. My understanding is that there is a contemporaneous videotape of them walking around the property where this political conference had been held. And in that videotape, they seem to be very happy together, arm in arm, hand in hand, something like that. That's my understanding of the reporting. Now, of course, there's also the allegation potentially that, yes, she was happy at that point because she didn't know that there was going to be sex, or there was going to be the level of sex that ended up happening, and that she was given some kind of a Mickey, some kind of a drug. But I think that would have to be proven. And my understanding is that the physical examination of her is not right away. I think I'm right on that it's a couple of days later.
Yeah, a couple of days later.
If there was some kind of drug in her system that's, some kind of Mickey, some kind of date rape drug, it probably would have dissipated and not been in her system later. So I don't think they're going to have that kind of corroboration. And apparently his story is that they did have consensual sex. She was very, very drunk. Now, sometimes in California, they prosecute on the basis that the person is so drunk that or should have known that they cannot give consent. And then, of course, the counter argument is that, well, the man maybe was so drunk, too. Maybe he wasn't perceiving, accurately, like if he'd have been sober, whether he was getting consent or not. But Hegseth's story, anyway, is that it was consensual sex, that whatever happened, she agreed to, that he said to her several times, "Are you okay with this?" And that she said yes. Her side of the story is that what she remembers, because she was very hazy because she drank so much, or maybe she was given this drug unawares, that she said no a lot. And the police didn't prosecute. And from that, you could say, well, they didn't have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It certainly doesn't prove that he was cleared. Even a jury verdict of not guilty doesn't show that you were cleared. If you're not charged or you're not found guilty by the jury, technically, all you could say is that there was not proof beyond a reasonable doubt for the prosecutor to charge me. There was not proof beyond a reasonable doubt for the jury to convict me if you were found not guilty at a jury trial, which it never went to that level, Mark.
And so after this, we get to the hush money that was paid, the settlement that they reached, and that was done outside of the court, obviously, outside of any formal court. And there is now then just a question of navigating around this stuff to confirmation, meaning it's not a legal question now. So it's really just a question of if you can, with this baggage, get to confirmation. Now, he has other baggage, I'd suggest, which is associated with his disposition toward the military generally, toward women in the military, his inability to really produce any kind of evidence associated with having managed much of anything before. And now he'll be charged with managing almost 3 million employees of the Defense Department. So there's there's so much here that just doesn't really make sense to me anyway. But it was the legal question that I had for you, and that's why I wanted to start with that. Can I ask you
Mark,
about the? Yeah, go
Mark,
ahead,
can I
please.
cut in? Those are all excellent points, and it just seems like he's unfit. And of course, one of the problems with having someone unfit who's just a Trump loyalist is that he could do some very scary things in that job. Your other guest on Tuesday, David K. Johnston, always reminds people that if he starts to monkey around, Trump does, with the military structure, that's when to really get scared for our democracy and for his authoritarian tendencies. And of course, the Department of Defense chief, right, the head of the Department of Defense, could concoct something against the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This Hegseth has shown a disposition to do that. You start getting rid of the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or you bring somebody like Mark Milley back in. He's no longer the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There's a new one that they say is too woke, whatever that means to Hegseth and Trump. But this one, Milley, he was a true patriot. You remember he made sure that Trump obeyed the law. He made sure he didn't fire at protesters, that he didn't just shoot him in the leg. Milley is one of the great heroes of the recent period. And the idea that he would be brought back into the service and then court-martialed, that wouldn't even give him a jury trial. Now, the good fortune, I think, is that he would have a military officer trial, and the military officers, I don't believe, would convict him on some trumped-up, and I use that advisedly, some trumped-up charges against him. But it's all scary. These people have careers. They're very competent people. They've dedicated their life to the defense of the United States. You know, it's so funny because it used to be that people who are on the left worried about the military-industrial complex and how much money we spent on that. And I still worry about how much money they spend on that, although I sure want them to spend some money in Ukraine, a lot of money in Ukraine, defending against Russian and Putin aggression over there. But yeah, I find a lot to like about these top military figures because they are trained in our Constitution, and they have shown a real disposition, a real understanding that it doesn't matter if the country's left or right. It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican. It doesn't matter if it's Trump. They have to obey the Constitution and stand up for the entire people of the United States. So I'm very worried about who the head of the Department of Defense is. And if I can just say one more thing about paying somebody in this situation of Hegseth, I think there should be many reasons to oppose him. I hope he doesn't get confirmed. But I just don't think that the fact that he paid somebody is a major factor. And people wince at this. I'm a criminal defense attorney. But if you're in enough trouble, it is worth it to make it go away. We're all human beings. We're not just cartoon figures that if something is wrong, we'll never, ever abide it, and we'll take our innocence to the ends of the earth. That is not the real world that we live in. If I don't know what the amount was that was paid, but you could certainly see why in that situation, even if he was wrongly accused, if everything in him said this didn't happen, even if he had that videotape, at the end of the day, how much money is it? I want to go on with my life. And that is the reality of human beings. And anyone who says otherwise, I don't think that they would be a very effective lawyer, because you have to make decisions like that and advise clients. And it's not always total right or total wrong. Sometimes there's a right time to settle.
You know, it's funny. I'll just tell the story quickly. I used a photo in a podcast episode, and I was contacted by an attorney in Orange County, California, who said that photo belongs to my client, and we want you to pay us now for the use of the photo. And they wanted $10,000. Now, $10,000 in the life of the podcast, I wasn't making $10,000. I mean, it was an absurd, made up figure. I mean, not enough people saw the photo to justify it. I didn't understand the arithmetic. It struck me as a shakedown. And I still think to this day it was a shakedown, although I also think, to be fair, that if that photo was the property of that artist, I definitely didn't have a problem with paying the artist something. And also I removed the photo. But my attorney, and this goes to your point, said, just pay it. It's because they will go to court on it. And you don't want to go to court, then you got to get me. I got to go to court. You got to pay me. Now you're paying them. Now you're paying me. And it was horrible. It was all the worst stuff that you hear. It was a shakedown, but it was a successful shakedown. And as you say, at some point you just go, just pay it. It's not worth it. And so I think you're very right. In the case of Hegseth, it's really not necessarily about that NDA that was signed. I think it's all about his competence or lack of competence. And now I just segue to this because I'm seeing it in the chat that he was forced out of the military because of his tattoos. That's not true. He was forced out of a detail related to the Biden inauguration because of his tattoos, all right? So that then led to his decision to leave the military and join Fox News, and then he became a weekend anchor on that Fox and Friends weekend show. That's what happened with his crusade-related tattoos. Now, it's also true that those are tattoos used by white supremacist groups, the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, et cetera. So, but again, these are things that can be interpreted a couple of different ways, David, right? I mean, so
part of what Trump does is the in your face. I mean, these are not serious nominations. You look at the people who've been Secretary of Defense. You look during the Vietnam War. Wasn't McNamara the Secretary of Defense?
Sure. Yeah.
One of the most distinguished people in America at the time that he got that job. You look at the other Secretaries of Defense, the ones that Trump had, the ones that Obama had. These were the most distinguished people. These were legendary military figures who could really not only command respect among the military, which of course it's a thing of respect. If you're a 4-star general and you've won the Purple Heart yourself, you have a level of you have a following, and that's a great thing. That's a great thing to have. He won't have any of that. And on top of that, he just doesn't have the organizational ability. It's 3 million people in the military. It's a huge organizational thing. That's why someone like McNamara did it. That's why these 4-star generals who've commanded a lot of people under them have done it, because there's an awful lot of moving parts. There's an enormous budget. I mean, it seems obvious. You would never think of someone like him. I mean, it's great that he was a commentator, Mark, and he had an opinion. Having an opinion doesn't make you capable. Especially in my opinion, kind of wacky opinions. This guy was woke. Women shouldn't serve in the military. I mean, people should look at the opinions that this guy voiced on Fox News on the weekend show that he had. But he just does not seem at all. And you wonder, these Republican senators are going to vote for him. And, Gaetz just pulled out. They're going to try to get Tulsi Gabbard in there. They're going to try to get RFK Jr. in there. And, the people who are despondent about the election and all that kind of stuff, I know you say that I'm your optimist, but I think that we should be very optimistic about it. I think the country will survive. I think that the reaction to this band of clowns and worse, malefactors, the whole bunch of them, what they're going to try to do to the country. First, I think the country will resist it. I think the judges will stand up. I think the system will stand up. I think the Republican senators won't, confirm some of these daffy people. And I think that the price that the Republicans are going to pay in 2 years, that is an election. The Senate's going to go Democratic. The House is going to go wildly Democratic 2 years from now. And then there'll be a calling to account. It's not like, it's all going to be forgiven and forgotten. People say, what's the accountability? Every crime will be looked into. It'll be reported. Both sides of it will be reported. The media, the legacy media, is not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. The podcasts aren't going anywhere. The court of public opinion isn't going anywhere. And so when they overplay their hand, they separate, mothers from their children again. They try to build these huge detention camps along the border in Texas, which are awful. They'll be characterized as American concentration camps. People aren't going to forget the things that they're going to do. If they selectively prosecute people at the Department of Justice, they'll howl. Their lawyers will howl. They'll bring motions in the court. There won't be midnight raids. This is America. They'll have to try to get somebody actually indicted by a grand jury, and eventually it'll all come out in court, and it'll all come out in the inquiry. So stay tuned.
Trump is someone who's appointed some judges who are very much to the same way of thinking that he offers. And so his Trump-appointed judges do a lot of things that are consistent with sort of a Trumpian perspective. And perhaps one of the most alarming is that pledge Trump has made of sorts, that he will pardon many of the people charged in connection with the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. So I read with interest that a Trump-appointed judge said it would be beyond frustrating and disappointing, that's a quote, if the incoming president does grant sweeping clemency to most of the defendants charged in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. This is kind of to your point, what you just made, because this is a U.S. District Judge, Carl Nichols, saying that blanket pardons or anything close to blanket pardons would be problematic. And Nichols' comments were a surprise because he's a restrained judge, people say, and they came at the end of a hearing in which he and federal prosecutors were grappling at length with the potential impact of a Donald Trump election on the ongoing January 6th cases. And he said anything close to blanket clemency would be very frustrating. I'm wondering, as we get closer to Trump ascending to the presidency, if you think, and maybe you look at this judge and other legal opinions that might be respected, if they'll factor into it, and if they do, might they change Donald Trump's disposition toward those blanket pardons, or how you handicap that situation legally?
Well, the Judge Nichols' trial in Washington, D.C. is interesting, and if I can just dwell on it for a second and then give you my opinion. The issues come up with some of these defendants that they either don't want to be sentenced or they don't want their case to go to trial because they speculate from Trump's own speeches and own words that they have a pardon in their future. If I were a judge on those cases, I would not engage in that speculation. If it's your day for sentencing, I would sentence you. If it's your day to have your trial, I would have your trial. Now, the interesting thing about Judge Nichols, although he made that statement, I believe that he delayed the trial. Right. And on the idea that, well, you have to get people from the community, it costs a lot of money, it's an inconvenience, and then in 3 months, if the person's just going to get pardoned. So I agree with the statement that he made, but I don't agree with his ruling from what I understand of it. And this fellow.
And by the way, let me just make a point. The trial that David Katz is talking about is against a guy who attacked a police officer with a big metal standard, and he's slammed. So this trial has already been delayed, and to delay it more is just extraordinary, given the nature of this violent attack.
You took my best line. This is the guy who's bashing people over the head. I mean, my goodness. He represents himself, so he can give these speeches that a lawyer would probably get sanctioned because they're irrelevant. They're like Trump rally speeches, but he's representing himself. So what I think is going to happen, I just think that, like, you take this case right now, real people, police officers were beat over the head. Okay, that is so awful. There are like people around this country who are for law enforcement and voted for Trump. God only knows why, because the price of eggs went up, I guess. And they think Trump is somehow going to bring it down, or they think somehow his tariffs are going to bring prices down when they're going to bring prices up. By the way, everyone should write down the prices of things like gas and groceries as Biden leaves office and compare them in a year or year and a half when they're deciding whether to vote Democratic or Republican, and figure out, did this man who promised that he would bring all of our prices down and make things affordable and make rent cheaper. Let's take a look when we compare prices about a month from now with about a year and a month from now when Trump is in office. But anyway, on these pardons, I think that they'll be so politically unpopular because the people who were hit in the head will appear on television all over the country, and they'll appear on social media, and they'll say, my God, you're about to pardon the guy who hit me over the head. And that's why I think, given that his trial has been much delayed, they should get on with his trial, and then there'll be the evidence from the trial, and then people can point to that, because if there's never been a trial, there'll be an attempt by Trump to mischaracterize what the evidence really was and make the person look like they were going to a love-in when they were going to a let's beat the police and beat the police. And what do the police and what do other voters think about the fact that he pardoned a guy who was beaten, who maybe has brain damage, whose life maybe isn't the same as it was before he was beaten by this person that Trump's about to pardon? So I don't think he's going to pardon a lot of them, but he's made a pledge that he's going to pardon many of them. So I think he'll take the more innocuous ones. That's politics in the real world. He'll give all these speeches how many he's going to pardon to certain groups that want to see pardons. And then, in fact, he'll probably pardon the more innocuous ones, or the ones who have the ones who are in the choir. Remember, he had them all singing in jail, and he put out a disc of that.
He's calling them, the singers. He calls them hostages or freedom fighters or something. I don't know. I mean, it's really kind of crazy.
He'll pardon the ones who sang on his record. He probably made money off the record.
What's happening on the Trump cases? And then I'll save by the way, just to let everybody know, I'll save David's comments about Matt Gaetz and him tapping out. till the very end. But I do want to ask you what's happening to the Trump court cases that we have watched, particularly the one in Georgia. I mean, it appears that they're all evaporating in one way or another. Can you speak to them?
I'm not sure how much the one in Georgia can evaporate. Right now, it's in the appellate courts for them to decide whether Fani Willis can stay on the case or whether she has a conflict of interest. The appointed special prosecutor, he was deemed to have a conflict of interest, but as long as he got out, then Fani Willis, the elected prosecutor who was just reelected in a landslide, she stayed on the case. So they're going to decide that. If they take her off the case, then someone from her office will pick up the case. If they leave her on the case, then she'll go ahead. But there's people besides Trump. I don't know, as it rolls along, what the argument's going to be, why they can't prosecute all the people in that case who are not named Trump. They'll have to put on their defenses, try to prove, whatever their particular defenses are, Mark, in that prosecution. I don't see how the whole prosecution gets thrown out. As to Trump, I think everyone seems to agree that they just cannot prosecute, even in state court, a sitting president. It's too inconvenient. Any judge, any appellate court will bar it if the prosecutor tries to actually pursue it. We're having a nuclear crisis. We're having this disaster, that disaster, and the president is supposed to be down there, in court or send his lawyers. I mean, the reality is people who say, oh my God, Trump, what a comeback. How could this man possibly endure what he's endured? And yet he made this comeback. First of all, he used those trial settings, right? Those cases for propaganda. And on top of that, he gave it to very well-paid, expensive lawyers, and they dealt with the stuff that happened in court. Moving on to New York, that one's been very controversial, of course, because in that one, the jury unanimously found him guilty of whatever it is, the 34 felonies. A lot of people think that case shouldn't have been brought, that it was a bad precedent, that it was kind of a nickel and dime. It was the least of the four. Why are they going on the least of the four? That's the way it ended up, with the other ones being continued for so long by Trump's lawyers, right? And so now here we are. So I think the most likely thing is that the judge goes ahead with the sentencing. I just really think that that's the likely thing. But I think he's going to fine him. I don't think he's going to give him probation. He's going to say the conviction is good. Here's the fine. I'm not giving you any imprisonment. I'm not giving you any probation, electronic monitor, or home detention, but I'm giving you the biggest fine I can under the law, and the conviction's valid. And then Trump will appeal that, and we'll see what the result is. And if there's some argument that he can't appeal it while he's, I don't see why he can't appeal it while he's president. And if he appeals it while he's president, of course, the government can respond to it. Remember, this is the state government. He doesn't control who's in the attorney general's office in New York State, the state attorney general that would defend the conviction. He doesn't control the judiciary down there. He can't pardon himself for a state offense. So I think that's the most likely. I really do. The other ones are that he says, no, I'm not ready to impose sentence for 4 years. Now, I think he would turn to the defense attorneys for Trump and he'd say, I intend to sentence him today unless you want me to do something else. And if they say, no, wait 4 years, and that's what Trump's lawyers are asking for, he can't very well say he had the sword of Damocles hanging over his head for 4 years. He asked for it. And if they say, no, we want you to go ahead with the sentencing today, then they go ahead with the sentencing today. Some other people have said that what he might do is impose the sentence and then suspend all of it for 4 years. But again, I think the fine is the more elegant solution. The judge affirms that the conviction was all fine, that there was no error, that there was no presidential immunity. If there was anything that shouldn't have come in under the later U.S. Supreme Court presidential immunity ruling, if there was any such thing, it was a harmless error because there was such overwhelming other evidence against Trump. He would have been found guilty anyway. Go ahead, sentence him and impose this fine. But the other alternative is that he could just say it's a valid conviction and then say, I'll sentence you in 4 years. But again, he'll turn to Trump's lawyers. So Trump's lawyers, they'll spin something else to their base. They'll say something else about it. But the record will show that they will have asked for it. So if there's the case still hanging over his head for 4 years, they will have asked for it.
You know, David, I just am reminded, because I saw this in the chat, of something that we did talk about on Monday, and I just, maybe there's a take on this, maybe not, but, the Onion the satirical comedy website, bought up the InfoWars URL at auction, and with the full approval of the Sandy Hook families that are getting all this settlement money from the dissolution, essentially, of the Alex Jones estate, and the URL is among them. The InfoWars, various domain names and domains are among those things that are being auctioned off. So anyway, now Elon Musk, I think, supported Alex Jones in trying to seize back, or at least seize away from the Onion, this InfoWars domain. I'm wondering, just again, they're arguing, at least from what I've read in published reports, that it wasn't a legitimate auction, that, the fix was in for essentially the Onion to get this site. Can this, I guess it can be, litigated and held up in a Texas court, which seems sympathetic to Elon Musk?
Well, Musk has a law firm named Quinn Emanuel. I don't know if he is using them for this case, but he uses them for a huge amount of cases. They used to have a big billboard out at Burbank Airport, if anybody remembers it. And it's a series of different billboards, which, huge firm, a billboard, but it obviously worked. They wouldn't have had the billboard if it didn't work. And now they have Musk as a huge client. The amount of money that they charge and the amount of money that Musk will pay for lawyers. So this seems to be the strategy. And I'm not saying that the cases are frivolous. I'm not saying the lawyers didn't investigate the law and the facts before they went forward with them. But I mean, how is the Onion supposed to pay a lawsuits, brought by Musk? How is anybody supposed to pay? You talked about this $10,000 that you thought you didn't really owe, but your lawyer said. So what are you going to do here? I mean, Musk will spend, what's he worth? $300 billion, they say.
Sure,
it's so
sure.
unbelievable. It's such a phenomenal amount of money. And so once he decides, okay, I'm screwing you, the Onion, I'm bringing a lawsuit against you. Not saying it's a frivolous case, not saying it's one that hasn't been researched, but he chooses you, or he chooses somebody else. And there's really, I mean, if it's found to be a frivolous lawsuit, if it's vexatious, the judge is supposed to give you relief. I don't know about this case, Mark, but I pity the poor Onion if they've been chosen by Musk to be sued.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's again, the deep pockets can ultimately derail this. So,
in a criminal case, they'll give you a public defender, and some of the public defenders are very good. But in a civil case, there's some ways, if you're fighting with your landlord, there's some states that will give you a free civil lawyer. But generally speaking, if the Musks of this world go after you and you're the Onion, whoa.
Yeah,
whoa.
Exactly. I mean, you can only fight so hard against that kind of deep-pocketed legal team. So let's finish up with the Matt Gaetz thing. I mean, he was on track to have a contentious sort of landing at the Justice Department. Now he's tapped out. It was just too much heat. I wonder if you can give me some thoughts on that, and generally speaking, what will happen at Justice?
Well, it's so wonderful that he did not become the Attorney General. And I said before that a lot of Trump's picks, they're not serious. They're really in your face. They're really, watch this. And the first time he had guardrails, and this is to show, watch this. You see the person that he just sent to NATO, or would send to NATO? I was actually on a show with him. The right-left thing. He's one of the people I debated, Matt Whitaker, quite a bit. And I did not think, and I thought he was a fine fellow, just, personally, but I did not think as I spoke with him, wow, this will be our next ambassador to NATO. It just
to remind everybody, he's the guy who has the, he had a time travel thing that he was selling to people. A Bigfoot evidence thing he was selling. He's something of a grifter and a huckster in the manner of Trump. A toilet scam. He had really, these are things that I'm not just making this stuff up. We talked about the story yesterday. So that's who David's talking about, who was debating him on News Nation.
And these poor countries like, Finland, or, the ones that really need NATO, the European countries, they send their ex-presidents, their finest trained diplomat who speaks 4 languages and spent their life studying this, to be their representative to NATO. So what does it say when Trump sends this fellow, or would send this fellow, to NATO? It's like, We think, right? It's like it's like a club. You want to say to the club, I don't care. Look who I sent. And why show this disrespect for NATO? This is the greatest alliance in the history of the modern world. This is what's saving Europe. The captive nations, they were called when I was a kid, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Now they're free. They're part of the democratic West, right? And Putin wants to grab them and suppress them. And if he has any luck in Ukraine, that's where he plans to go next. And NATO is the bulwark against that. This is the man he sends to NATO. So Gaetz was and Tulsi Gabbard, she's another one we could talk about. But Gaetz was going to be an absolute unmitigated disaster because he might have actually tried to go after his enemies. Now, people watching your show may think, well, some people may think that's all it's about. That's all the Department of Justice does is go after enemies. And I'm here to tell you, no, it does not. Adam Schiff and I were assistant U.S. attorneys under Reagan. We were both Democrats. We didn't go after Democrats. We didn't go after Republicans. We went after people because the evidence was there, and they were people that they ought to go after. Big drug dealers, right? They had cartels even back then. Huge fraudsters was mainly the people that I went after. And it's just not about politics at all. But the fear was that Gaetz, Mark, would make it about politics. He really would not have a to-do list, as Kamala Harris said. He'd have an enemies list. Now, other people may think, well, there must be protections in the system, so that can't happen. And that would be, some people think the grand jury. That is false. The grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. The grand jury does not conduct an independent investigation. The U.S. Supreme Court has said that exculpatory evidence does not have to be presented to the grand jury. You don't have a right to dismiss the case. So the classic example is that a bank is robbed and you get charged with it, and you're 5'2", and there are two witnesses. One of them says, I saw the robbery. The man was 5'2". And the other witness says, no, the robber was 6'1". They can present only the fact that one witness said that the robber was 5'2", and not present or tell the grand jury anything about the fact that another witness says that the robber was 6'1". They can indict the 5'2" guy. Now, the answer is always, why would the prosecutor do that? Because the defense will learn about the fact that that witness said that, and it won't end up in a conviction. But can you make people's lives miserable by getting them charged by a grand jury? Absolutely. And will the grand jury under our system be able to do anything about it? The reality is no, because they're completely under the thumb of the prosecutor and what the prosecutor chooses to present. And then you think, okay, well, the judges will protect the person if they're railroaded by a grand jury and a prosecutor. But the answer to that is that it's very hard to make a selective prosecution motion. Now, maybe with Gaetz, those motions would have succeeded. You're a Democrat, you raise a lot of money for the Democrats, and you get charged. But they would always come in with a story that, no, it was independent. They didn't choose you for that reason. So thank God he didn't get confirmed to be the Attorney General. And the Attorney General should be a serious person. They should be the Attorney General for all the people of the United States. They shouldn't be the Roy Cohn of Trump. And if it looks like the next one to come along is a Roy Cohn of Trump, let's hope that the Republican senators, thinking about the fact that a lot of them have to run in 2 years, and there will be a huge backlash if they put in a Roy Cohn, that they will actually do their constitutional duty, which is to advise and consent, and not consent to someone who's a Roy Cohn Attorney General.
Maybe. I mean, as you know, I feel a little less optimistic and a little more cynical about the crew up there, particularly the MAGA movement that has absorbed the GOP. And I think you can only push back on presidents who have nominations so much. You know, David Katz, I think at some point you have to kind of let presidents have the crew that they want. So I hope you're right. And I hope that, you know, cooler heads prevail. But I think on some level, Trump is going to become angrier and angrier and more insistent that he gets the people that he wants. But I love your take, which is that, in a sense, Trump is making noise. He's sort of trolling Washington and government and saying, hey, you guys think I can't do this? Let me show you. This is my crew, and you will confirm them because I want them. And I believe he will get the lion's share of them through. By the way, that NATO guy who you Matthew Whitaker, who you used to debate, he was fined $26 million for these scams and this scam company. And and you think, well, that's got to be disqualifying. I mean, right there, well, the president of the United States, the president-elect, Donald Trump, he was fined $25 million for the Trump University scam. So, they can,
Trump's only mad that he beat him. He's only mad that his 26 is higher than 25. But let me just say one thing that, and I know we've been on for a while, but one of the things that Trump tries to do is to intimidate, to get things to happen without taking legal action. And so everybody, and I'm sure everybody out there is thinking this way, okay? You believe what you believe. You stand up for what you stand up for. This country's going to be fine if everybody helps to make sure that it's fine, right, Mark? And so he thinks that people are going to self-deport. No, people who have a life here are not going to self-deport. And thank goodness, because our prices would go up enormously if these people who are contributing to the economy self-deported. He thinks that people are going to hold back their opinions because, I don't know, maybe this will be a country, maybe this really will be like Putin. Maybe there'll be midnight raids here. Maybe people will start falling off of fifth floor balconies all over the place in America. No, they won't. No cop is going to push somebody off a fifth floor balcony like apparently the KGB does over there in Russia. Ain't happening. So stick to your opinions, right? Do what you do. And, he tries to get a lot of things to happen just by intimidating people. And I thought one good sign was that John Thune became the majority leader. I've known some people who've known him. He's a serious person. He's a patriot. He's not there to allow recess appointments. If they go into recess for, I think it's 10 days, then he gets to appoint somebody for 2 years. Watch out, because if you don't think that Trump would, if they went on a recess appointment and everything was cool on the 11th day, appoint Gaetz. That's just the kind of person that Trump.
Yeah,
that's more than in your face. I'm smarter than you. I outplayed you. You went on recess because you thought I was going to be a good guy, and I put Gaetz right back in there. He said he wouldn't go through the confirmation process. Well, he didn't. Don't let him play you. We have a long memory of Trump. Don't let him play you.
Yeah, he'd go on a shopping spree if you gave him that recess appointment. Love our conversations. Find David Katz across the pundit world. As I say, he is the legal analysis of choice across the English-speaking world, and he's a defense attorney working in California, the former federal prosecutor, now working the defense side of the table. I love our conversations. Thank you, David Katz.
I'm a busy working lawyer when I'm not with you, Mark, or on Times of London or News Nation.
I do appreciate the time you give us. Thank you, pal.
Thank you.
David Katz, everybody.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.